Hi, I'm Tori from Toriska Patterns, and today I will be showing you how to make this mitered corner placemat, as well as a matching coaster. Now what makes this unique is the method that I show you for doing this mitered corner. It's a little bit simpler than some other methods you may have seen in the past. You don't need to do a lot of measuring and pressing and folding. You just have to do a little bit of measuring and sewing, and I will show you how to do this method. I think that you'll find it, some people might find it a little simpler than what they've tried to do in the past. So thank you, and I hope you enjoy sewing this project. All right, let's talk about the materials that you will need for your placemats and or coasters. You will need fabric for both the top and the back, and you will need interfacing for the inside of your placemat. You can use batting, you can use fleece interfacing. I recommend the non-fusible type. You can use, what I'm using this time is something called Insole Bright or Insole Fleece. Those are two different types from different companies, and it reflects the heat back. If you're using these in something like a pot holder, you're supposed to sandwich it between other batting. But for this, I just used one layer and it worked well, and it helps to reflect the heat back. But you're not going to want to put really, really hot things on it with just one layer. For your fabrics, quilting cotton is always a good bet. It works really well. Seeing that this is a quilting summit, I'm sure that you're used to working with quilting cotton, but you can also use home decor weight cotton, which is a little thicker. And if you're using quilting cotton, you might want to interface it with fusible woven interfacing like Pellon Shape Flex. It works well just to give it a little more body and maybe last longer over time. This coaster uses quilting cotton in both the top and the back, and it uses the Insole Bright on the inside. For the ones that I'm going to be sewing today that look like this, I decided to be a little adventurous, and I am using marine vinyl for the top, and the back is oilcloth that I found at my local fabric store. And the reason why I chose these is because they are wipeable, and my kids are still young enough that I don't want to be washing my placemats after every single time we use them. And I used these last night, the 5 of the 6 that I had planned on making. The 6th one will be today during the video. So I used the 5 that I had made, and sure enough, they were all messy afterwards, but I was able to wipe them clean. It is more tricky fabrics to work with, so I may regret picking this for the video, but I do like the finished result. And I did not feel a need to quilt it because this is a pretty stable interfacing, and I'm not planning on putting these through the wash. But you could tell that you can see that I did quilt it for the coaster, and that worked out well too. Other materials that you will definitely need are a ruler and pen, your iron, when I was making these and dealing with shifty fabric, I found that a thin 1/4 inch double-sided tape worked really well, but that's optional. And you either need quilting pins, safety pins to keep your layers together, or some spray adhesive basting spray. And that is all you need. So now we're going to work on putting everything together. So this pattern does include instructions for customizing your placemats to a different size. The instructions are for a 12 by 18 inch placemat, but you might find that your table doesn't fit something quite that large, so you may want to adjust the size. The finished ones that I decided to make for my table are 12 by 18, or sorry, 12 by 17, because when I made some test placemats, these are the test placemats I made, and tried them on my table, this was just a little too big, so I decreased it by 1 inch. I also tried different sized borders. This is another test one I made. My husband liked the thinner border better, but I really wanted to showcase more of this fabric, so I did 1.5 inch. I really like a thick border, so that's why I chose a 1.5 inch border for this pattern. But I did want to show you what it looks like with a 1 inch border, and I'm going to talk to you about the process of adjusting it to the size you want. First off, your batting will be the size of your finished placemat or finished coaster. So for this pattern, the batting is 12 inches by 18 inches. And I have all these in metric in the written pattern, so make sure that you download that. And the coasters are 4 inches by 4 inches. Now for your top fabric, to figure out this, for this pattern, the top fabric is cut at 15.5 inches wide and 9.5 inches tall. And all of these dimensions are also in the pattern, so you don't have to write them down or remember them. You can check the pattern out. Because I chose to have a 1.5 inch border, that's how I can calculate the size of the top by my finished size. So the batting is going to be taller than my top on each side by the width of the border, which is 1.5 inches, minus the seam allowance, which is 1/4 inch, which means it's going to be 1.25 inches wider on all sides than the top. And of course, if I add these together, that's 2.5 inches. So I knew that I needed to cut my top 2.5 inches narrower and shorter than my batting. So to reiterate, the difference between these is your desired border minus the seam allowance times 2, because you've got a border on each side. For your backing fabric, it's going to be quite a bit wider and taller than your batting and your top fabric. And to calculate this, you take whatever the border, your desired border is, so for me that's 1.5 inches wide, and you multiply that by 4. So that's 6 inches. And that is the difference in size in both height and width between my front and my back. And when I'm making these, this will end up wrapped around here like this on each side. So for my coaster, my finished coaster size is 4x4. And I did make this with these same fabrics, but it was almost impossible to sew. So I'm going to be making you a test, or I'm going to be making a coaster for this video out of quilting cotton because it's much easier. So my finished size is going to be 4x4. My backing is 3.5 by 3.5 because I'm going to have a 1/2 inch border like this, a 1/2 inch border minus the seam allowance, which is 1/4 inch, so it extends past each edge by 1/4 inch. So it's 1/2 inch shorter and 1/2 inch taller than the batting. And then my backing is, remember, you take the desired border, which for me is 1/2 inch, multiply it by 4, so that's 2 inches. So my backing is 2 inches wider and 2 inches taller than my top fabric. Okay, before I can do anything else, I need to attach the top to the batting. And I cannot use safety pins on this vinyl, so I'm going to have to use the spray adhesive. Plus, I just prefer to use spray adhesive over safety pins whenever possible. So I have put some paper behind my fabric so that I don't get this basting spray all over my work surface. And I'm going to carefully place this down, trying to get it 1 1/4 inches from each side and from the bottom. And have it all centered. And I will check, and it looks like I got that pretty well, but if I didn't, I might need to adjust this. Yep. Sometimes it's hard to get things perfect while I'm videoing because I'm doing things from a slightly funny angle. Okay, so I have this centered and ready to go. And I'm going to do one thing now, and that is make a little dot on the corner, and it's going to be a 1/4 inch from each edge. I will need this later for pinning the layers together. And I'm going to do the same thing with my coaster. I think I have this slightly crooked, so I'm going to redo it. Ugh. I might need more sticky stuff. Okay, that looks better to me. All right, and you need your ruler now as well. Okay. For this, you will take your the measurement of the border that you want, which is for me is 1 1/2 inches. Multiply that by 2. That's 3 inches, and then add the seam allowance, 1/4 inch. So that means 3 1/4 inches. I'm going to measure 3 1/4 inches from each corner and 1/4 inch from the edge. And I'm going to make a dot, which is hard to see because of my print. And I'm going to do that on each corner. And I'm also going to make a line drawn from dot to dot. This is important because this is going to be my sewing line. And I am just, instead of using my little ruler, I'm going to find where 3 1/4 inches is by using my mat. And I will do this on all 4 sides. There are other ways to do mitered corners that use a lot of pressing and measuring, and you have to do several different steps. And I've seen those ways online, and it comes up with a really nice result. I've even seen some placemats where you take the back and you do all sorts of measuring and folding, and then you end up with this this back that you just take the front and the batting and tuck it all in. And it's a really nice result. But when I was coming up with this method for a bag sewing pattern I just wanted my back to wrap around to the front. And I wanted to make it as easy as possible for people. And so after a lot of experimentation, I came up with this method. I'm sure other people do something similar, but I'm still proud of myself for coming up with this method. And it works really well for that pattern. And I have since used it for other patterns. For the last sewing summit, I used this for making mitered corner blankets out of flat sheets and minky. And I've done that for all of my kids. It's just a nice little trick. I feel like it's a cheap version, but it works well for me. Okay, so this batting or this coaster has a 1/2 inch border multiplied by 2, that's 1 inch, plus the seam allowance is 1 1/4 inches. So I'm measuring 1 1/4 and then 1/4 inch away from the edge as well. Actually, I'll just do all my dots and then all my lines. 1 1/4. All right, now all of my lines in between. Okay, so now we're ready to take these pieces over to the sewing machine and sew them. Before I started, I thought I'd show you that wallet pattern that I made where I developed this mitered corner technique. And it was because I needed to be able to have something wrap around and then slide in the interfacing afterwards. And so I came up with this method, which I've now adapted for these placemats. And for these placemats, we don't put in the interfacing afterwards, but originally that's one of the reasons why I planned it the way I did. Okay, we need to start off, I will start off with the coaster and then the placemat. You will take each corner and fold them right sides together. And I'm going to start at the dot and sew towards the edge. And I will backstitch both at the beginning and the end of the seam. And hopefully, if I have done my measuring correctly, I will, when I start sewing, it'll be on this dot on both sides. Ouch. All right, so it's going to look like this now. Almost like those little trays that you can make to hold things. But each corner does need to be trimmed. So I tend to trim it a little closer next to this part of the seam because that's going to be the corner and you want it to be pretty small there so you can have a sharp corner. And then the rest of it's more like a 1/4 inch. And I'm going to set that aside along with the rest of my coaster and move on to my placemat, which is a little harder to work with being oilcloth. It's just stiffer fabric. In fact, to help this not move around, I'm going to use my sewing clips. This one's a little hard to see the starting dot because of the print on this. And one thing I discovered is that it's slightly see-through, so I made sure to sew just a tiny bit to the left of my mark so that won't show when it's turned right side out. You probably don't have to do that normally, but see how my mark can be seen from the other side. I just used normal pen instead of a better option, which would have been a fabric pen, but I did not use that. So instead, I just make sure that I sew to the left of my seam by just a smidge. Try not to run into your sewing clip like I just did and then make a crooked seam. I don't think it's going to be a big deal. I'm not going to go back and fix it, but if I end up with 1/4 later on that's a little wonky, it'll be because of that. Actually, the first couple versions I've made of these were very wonky because of the fabric. So I figured out as I went along better ways to do things. But I still might go back and fix the first couple that I made because they don't lay as nicely as they should. Okay, so now I will trim these the same way as I trimmed the coaster. Just a little bit closer to the edge, next to the corner, and then about a 1/4 inch at the other part. Okay, I'm going to go back to the coaster for the next step. All right. The dot, the corner dot, is going to match up with these dots that I made here, that I sewed to those dots. So the end of the dot, at the end of the seam there, I will match up with my corner. And that sounds really complicated, but you'll see as you're doing it that it's not too bad. So, or another way that I sometimes do it is I flatten this side seam out. Well, this works a lot easier on the coaster than the placemat. And then I just place it flush with the edge of the top but not the back, not the batting. And from here I can kind of see, oh, there's my dots, and match them up. And if you're using quilting cotton, you can use pins, which is something that it's harder to use with that marine velvet. Excuse me. Actually, I'm going to pin this way. And then I'm gonna, you don't have to do the opposite edge, but for these coasters, I kind of found that that worked well. All right, looks like a little pyramid. I'm going to set this aside and show you how to do it on the placemat, which is a bit trickier, once again, because of my fabric. I'm probably going to say that 5 more times during this video. I thought about, well, why don't I just pick an easier fabric for this video? Oops. But I'd already put so much work into these placemats, I decided just to make it work. Okay. So I attempted to do this with clips, but I found that ultimately it needs to be done with pins. And as long as I can keep the pins in the seam allowance, it's not an issue. So I'm going to start with one side, and like I did with the coasters, do the opposite. You don't have to do that. Sometimes I just move around in a clockwise fashion, but it also is easier to show this way. It just lays nicer. Okay, so I'm going to put my 2 pins in. Try not to pin my thumb when I push it back. Okay. Now I'm going to do the long side. And on one of these long edges, I will go ahead and pin the center. The other one I will not, because I'm going to be leaving it open for a few inches for turning. And then the last side, this is the one I'm going to leave open. So I'm going to put a pin here. And a pin over here. But not one in the middle. Okay, so now we're going to sew these. Okay. All right, I'm going to start on one of these edges. Now for the coasters, you have to start pretty close to the corner. And I'm going to back stitch. Remember, I'm doing a 1/4 inch seam, 1/4 inch from the edge of my fabric, not the edge of the batting. And I don't know if you can see this because this is a funny angle, but I'm sewing right up to the end, right up to that dot, right up to the end of that corner seam. and then back stitching. I'm going to try to adjust the camera so it's a little bit better. Okay. I'm not going to bother trimming that seam. I'm just going to push this side back, and here I'm going to start at that end of that seam, back stitch, and go forward. Unfortunately, my camera is kind of in front of my face, and I'm having a hard time seeing my corners super well without running into the camera. So I'll do my best and hope that I'm sewing accurately. On this very last side, I'm just going to do a couple of stitches here. Well, first I'll back stitch, then I'll go a couple stitches, back stitch again. So I want to leave as wide of an opening as I can here for turning. Oops, sorry, got out of the frame. Okay, so I now need a point turner or something to poke the corners out, and I'm using this. So I'm going to go through this opening here. I'm going to go through this opening here and turn it right side out. This does not work very well with thicker fabrics. Just be very cautious poking these corners out. You do not want to poke your seam ripper or your point turner through these edges. I did do that on one of my coasters because it just, with the oilcloth, it just ripped. All right, I'm going to pull this apart a little bit to help get this corner out. The interfacing I use is kind of crinkly, so you can hear it. Not everybody likes the crinkle of the Insole Bright Insole fleece. Okay. So make sure all four corners are poked out. And then because this fabric, it can shift around, definitely work to make sure that all of your edges look like they're the same width. You can go and, looks like this corner right here I need to work on a little bit because it's not laying nicely. And then after I have everything the way I'd like it, this edge folds under. This raw open edge folds under. And I'm just going to close it with a pin. I'm going to set this aside, and we're going to sew the placemat. All right, to turn this inside out, I've got my point turner. I have some clips that I'm going to use to help keep things in place. These are longer clips. And I have some 1/4 inch wide double-sided tape that I did not need when I was using cotton, but for this I do find that I need. So first I'm going to do my best to turn this out as painlessly as possible, hopefully. This is my least favorite part. At least with this fabric, it's my least favorite part. Okay, before I start using my point turner, I'm using my fingers to try to get these edges out as much as possible, because the point turner has been known to poke through this fabric. It tore right through one coaster that I was doing. I was able to stitch the back like that to fix it. But I'm very cautious with this fabric now. I don't know how it'll hold up over the years. Hopefully my kids won't mess it up. I also don't know how well heat will go on these if we have hot plates. So it's a little bit of an experiment. But I do know that we currently don't use placemats at all because they get so messy so fast. So this seems better than using nothing. All right. Whew. Now I'm going to take out my point turner and gently push these corners out. Also, I make sure that I'm pushing the batting outward, because on these edges it might, right now it's flipped in, so I'm pushing it out all the way around. All right, this is my fourth corner. And I flip this edge out as well. Okay. And this is where I ran into some issues with the first couple that I made. I did not do this next step on a flat surface. I was trying to do it mid-air, and I ended up with them kind of like, the finished ones don't sit down flat, one corner goes up. So now I make sure I do this on a flat surface. I push every edge down. If you need to, you can get out your ruler and make sure that your finished edges are the correct width, 1.5 inches. To me, it sort of looks like this one's wider, so I'm gonna push these down and make sure that everything's equal and where it should be. Okay, and the reason I like these long ones for this next step is I can kind of flatten everything out. I'm going to put this like this. And if you are using fabric that can be that you can use pins with, this is a lot easier, because I can just take my pins or my safety pins, flatten this out, and just put pins all throughout this. If you were using safety pins from the beginning, you would take them out at this step, then put them back through all 3 layers rather than just 2 layers. Sorry, I almost forgot to tell you that, and I don't want to forget steps just because I'm not doing them with this particular fabric. But all of these steps are in the written pattern, so make sure that you look at that too. These scissors are not very sharp. They're my junky fabric scissors that I keep out in case someone uses them on paper. My nice fabric scissors I keep tucked away. Okay. All right, and here is where I also ran into issues on my other ones. They, the clips, even with the clips, they weren't quite long enough to close this properly, and the fabric tended to slip and slide around. So what I have discovered is easiest is to use the double-sided tape. So let's see. This is about 7.5 or 8 inches. I'm going to not go all the way across the opening because I need to have room to stuff it in. Okay, I'm going to push back this fabric, and I'm going to, I gotta do it over here where I can see a little bit better. I'm going to put my double-sided tape at the very edge, because this is only 1/4 inches wide. So I want to put it at the very edge of my top fabric. I can't really see. And then I peel off the top. Some double-sided tape is really hard to peel off, but the kind that I use is from Wawak, and it works really well. I use the leather stuff. Okay, so then I carefully put my top fabric, fold it back 1/4 inch, and put it on top of this. Then I can flatten it out. And you can adjust as necessary. If you need to pull it off, you can, and slightly adjust it. And now it works without having to use a clip there or pin or anything. So now I'm ready to go and sew around the outside. All right, now we're going to sew around the outside, and we're going to edge stitch along this border. Okay, so this is finished sewing. I still need to do a little bit of quilting here, but I'm going to set this aside and sew the placemat closed. Now for this, one thing I try to do is, as much as possible, hold up this side because it helps it to remain flat while I'm sewing and not get warped. This would be easier if I had a flatbed machine, but I don't. In fact, there. Put my Kleenex box here, and that'll help me out. I also forgot to mention that when going around, I do lengthen my stitch. Yeah, it's got in the way of my clip, but you know what? I'm going to keep going. Normally I would fix that stitch, but because everything that I sew in this oilcloth leaves a hole that you'll always be able to see, I'm just going to have a crooked stitch there. Since these are going on my table, and mostly my family and kids will be the ones that see it, it'll just be something that I know that's there, but hopefully other people don't notice. This is one of the reasons I also don't love this oilcloth, is that sometimes when turning it right side out, it perforates on those stitches that were being stressed when I was turning it right side up. Altogether, this has been an interesting experiment, and if I ever use oilcloth again, it'll be only for very specific projects that I'll know exactly what I'm getting into. Alright, using this tissue box worked really well to keep it flat. It looks like it did not warp or anything. It's laying nice and flat. And so for this placemat, I am all done. I'm not going to quilt it any further. I'm just going to call it good. For the coaster, I'm going to do just a little bit of quilting. I cannot claim to be an expert on quilting. Generally, what I just do is some stippling. But I think it'd be cute on a coaster to have some sort of little design. I don't know, maybe like a little mug or something. But for this, I'm just going to do my best to do some stippling, and hopefully I won't embarrass myself in front of all of you quilters who are expert quilters. And I have my phone kind of in front of my face, so we'll see. Not my best, not my worst, but it works. And now this one I am all finished. I'm just going to pull my tails to the back to do a little knot. And my little coaster is complete. I will probably want to go and press this just to make it it's kind of wavy from all the sewing. So I'm going to press it to make it nice and flat. Oops. This one I'm not going to press because I don't think it'll do well with heat, that sort of heat at least. But I can go put it on my table, and now I have 6 finished placemats. So thank you for sewing with me today. Thank you for sewing with me today. I hope you enjoyed making your placemat, and hopefully, like me, you found it enjoyable enough to make more, and even some matching coasters. You can check out my website, toriska.com, for more free tutorials and paid patterns. I specialize in bag sewing patterns, so that's what you'll find the most of, but I also have some tutorials for projects all around your home. Happy sewing!